When you think about modern warfare, your mind probably jumps to things like advanced technology, cyber attacks, maybe even hypersonic missiles. But what if the single most important factor in a potential war between two nuclear-armed giants isn't a new weapon, but the very ground they'd be fighting on? Well, today, we're going to break down that exact geostrategic puzzle, a potential war between China and India. And really, it all boils down to this one fundamental question. Because before any army can even start fighting, it first has to get there. And standing between India and China is the most formidable barrier on planet Earth, the Himalayas. Okay, so this map right here, this is our chessboard. And this isn't just some line on a map, it is a high-altitude fortress. You can see the massive military buildups on both sides. You've got Chinese armor on the Tibetan Plateau staring down India's specialized mountain divisions. Every single piece on this board is totally hemmed in by the absolutely brutal terrain. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. This is our roadmap. We're going to see why geography itself might just be the most important general in this entire conflict. We'll start on the ground with a fortress, then we'll move to the sky, then to a critical vulnerability, before we zoom out to look at the sea and even the calendar itself. Okay, first up, the fortress. You have to understand, the Himalayas aren't just a mountain range. For a military planner, they're a defensive weapon. And for any invading army, that's a complete nightmare. There's this rule in mountain warfare. Military doctrine says an attacking army needs overwhelming numbers. Some analysts say you need a staggering 10 attackers for every single defender just to have a shot. The high altitude gives you these perfect natural observation posts, and the few passes that are even usable, like Nathula or Shipkula, they basically act as funnels, forcing any invader into pre-planned kill zones. And this is where India has been really smart. They've tailored their forces specifically for this environment. They've stationed a ton of battle-hardened mountain infantry divisions up there. These guys are the absolute experts in high-altitude combat. Their entire job is to bleed an attacking force dry, long before it could ever even dream of getting to the Indian plains. But it's not just the ground, right? The fortress is also the very air itself. Once you get above 15,000 feet, the laws of physics become your worst enemy, creating what's essentially a high-altitude kill zone for any attacker. So the key concept we've got to wrap our heads around is something called the oxygen deficit. The air up there is just so thin. It wears down soldiers, and, maybe even more importantly, it absolutely chokes the performance of engines. What this does is create a logistical kill zone, a place where even the most advanced tech just hits a brick wall. Now this is fascinating. It lays out a physics problem for China's Air Force that is, frankly, almost impossible to solve. Their jets have to take off from the super high Tibetan Plateau, where the thin air just kills their lift. That means they can't take off with a full load of fuel and weapons. But Indian jets? They're taking off from air bases down on the plains, at sea level, where the air is dense, letting them fly with full tanks and a maximum weapons load. So it doesn't matter how fancy your stealth fighter is, a J-20 can't outsmart the laws of physics. The bottom line is, in this specific fight, it just can't perform at its peak potential, which hands the Indian Air Force a massive home field advantage right from the start. Okay, but let's be fair. India's defense isn't a perfect shield. There is one spot where the geography actually gives China a potential opening, and it's a place of incredible tension, the Siliguri Corridor. Yep, it's called the Chicken's Neck, and you can see why. It's this tiny little sliver of land that connects 7 of India's northeastern states to the rest of the country. And if China ever managed to cut it, well, that would be a strategic disaster for New Delhi, cutting off millions of its own people. Think about that. Just 22 kilometers wide. That's the entire lifeline. And because it's so fragile, India has basically turned this area into one of the most heavily fortified zones on Earth. They are ready to defend what military pros call death ground. And that means exactly what it sounds like. A place you have to hold, no matter the cost, or you face total disaster. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about India's shield up in the mountains. But what about its sword? Well, for that, we have to get out of the Himalayas completely and head down to the Indian Ocean, because that's where the whole strategic map just flips on its head. This brings us to China's great vulnerability, what strategists call the Malacca Dilemma. China, as you probably know, is the world's factory. It's the biggest oil importer, and its entire economy runs on energy shipped over the sea. and the most critical ceiling of all is the Strait of Malacca. And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out. A whopping 80% of China's oil imports have to sail through this one narrow choke point. So in a war, if India decided to blockade this strait, it could potentially grind the entire Chinese economy to a halt in a matter of weeks. So how could India actually pull this off? Simple, by using its own geographic trump card, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. They sit there like a chain of unsinkable aircraft carriers, parked right at the mouth of the strait. This gives India the power to project both air and naval force to control this absolutely vital global artery. All right, there's one last commander in this war, and this one is totally non-negotiable for both sides: the weather. In the Himalayas, the most powerful force isn't an army, it's the seasons. You see, any invasion of India from the north has to go head-to-head with general winter. For 8, sometimes 9 months of the year, massive snowfall makes the high mountain passes totally impassable for tanks and supply trucks. This leaves this tiny, tiny window of just 3 to 4 months in the summer for any kind of major military campaign. And that is just not enough time for a sustained invasion and occupation before the calendar itself comes along and defeats you. Okay, so let's pull all of this together and tally the score. When you lay out all these geographic factors, a really clear picture starts to emerge. And it's a score dictated less by fancy military tech and more by the cold, hard realities of the map. So on land, you've got the Himalayan fortress combined with that killer oxygen deficit, and that gives the defender, India, a huge advantage. And then at sea, the Malacca dilemma and the perfect placement of those island chains give India a really powerful offensive counterpunch with a potential blockade. You know, in the end, this quote really says it all. In the world's highest battlefield, just getting supplies, fuel, and air support to the front line, that's the whole game. And in this fight, geography has basically handed the defender a home field advantage that's almost impossible to beat. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Even with all our incredible 21st century technology, when you're talking about the roof of the world, maybe some things just can't be conquered. So is geography still, destiny?